Permaculture is governed by a set of ethics. And those ethics are really simple, but also incredibly empowering. And that is that every decision we make impacts on the outside world and changes it. So the choices that we make individually, we could call those economic choices, but they're really any choices that we make about energy, resources, our own actions, changes the world outside. And it changes the world around us, and it changes our own experience of the world as well. So it all begins with us, and our own thoughts and our own actions shape and change the world. And the first ethic is, we call it fair share, but really it's about understanding our own economic power and the importance of the individual decisions that we make. The second ethic is around that is, so again, it begins with the question is, how do we meet our needs? We all want and need different things. We're all individuals. So what is exactly right for you or is right for you is different. And no one's should be telling you what you need to do personally. But the way that you choose to meet your needs, that sandwich you're eating, whatever else, is if you're going to take that from somebody else, is then that's created a negative consequence. So the second set of ethics in permaculture is around how the decisions that we make for ourselves impact on other people. So we call that people care, but we have to be really conscious of the fact that every decision that we make also impacts on other people. And if we're impacting negatively on other people, that will lead to conflict in some form or another. And we come from the UK. All this fabulous wealth that we see around us in the UK is being appropriated globally by colonial systems and international banking cartels and stuff. Non-local resources that we've brought here that have impact and cause suffering on other parts of the world. Third ethic, and it's absolutely central to permaculture, is the understanding that decisions that we make impact on ourselves, impact on other people, but they also operate within a living system, planet Earth, that we're just part of. We're not in control of it, we're just part of it. And again, our friend from Ecuador was very, very aware of that he's very conscious of the relationship that we have with this living world. And again, we're so detached from it here in UK, we're not aware of the impact we're having on the living world. I was also kind of thinking we've also been dispossessed of our land and of our heritage, but it happened so long ago that we don't know it. We all live in cities. We don't own anything. We don't come from anywhere. We don't have any land. We don't have a connection. And that's because we've been slowly excluded from the land since the Norman invasion 1,000 years ago. We've been dispossessed and disconnected from the land, and therefore we've lost that connection that again our previous speaker had. Capitalism isn't really guided by ethics, it's just guided by profit maximization at all costs. And the economic model that we're all part of tries to optimize itself by not paying the social cost of production by driving down wages and so forth, externalizing the costs of production onto society. Wages are now so low in the UK, people in full-time jobs are needing to go to food banks. That's just totally wrong. And the other way that capitalism is without ethics is that it tries to avoid paying the environmental costs of production. So everything that we do is driven pretty much by fossil fuel energy. That is having an enormous negative impact on the living world, but we're not directly experiencing it. So anyway, the principal ethics of permaculture around fair shares, around the decision that we make, around effects on society, which we call people care, and then understanding that we're part of a living system, Earth care. We have to get this on board. All the decisions that we make should be guided by those three ethics. And that's the first sort of point in permaculture. How do we do that? Well, we have to learn. We have to pay attention. And our ethics sit on top of a set of guiding principles, and I'll talk about those. It's just a very simple way of thinking that steers you towards more sustainable, more thought through, more holistic ways of doing and more sustainable outcomes. And how we actually achieve what we want to do is permaculture offers a set of design tools. So it's not about talking about it. We're beyond the point of talking about things like that. We need to create change. And we create change by being guided by these ethics, operating within these principles, and using strategies, design tools, to actually affect change. And I've been immersed in this. I got involved in permaculture in 1991 in Zimbabwe, and it's in rural Africa. It's really, again, it's people that have such a close connection to the land and to the environment that they get it so much more deeply and immediately than we do. So it's nothing to do with being green. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not a green. Permaculture is how do we live on this planet without destroying it or ending into permanent warfare with the people around us. We all have a stake in that. You don't have to be a tree hugger for that. You have to realize that we all have a stake in sustainability. Why wouldn't we? We live in a lie. This whole idea of talking about greenness and the whole sustainability paradigm is window dressing. At best, it's just destroying the planet a little bit more slowly. And it's not about these personal choices. We've been sold environmentalism as if it was some kind of consumer choice. It's not. Permaculture is a different way of thinking, and that's what we have to get to. We have to think differently and behave differently. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about climate change. We are in an ecological crisis. We really, really are. 2014 is the hottest year ever measured until 2015, which broke the records. Then 2016 didn't just break the records of 2015, it broke the records by the biggest single increment that we'd ever seen in 1 year. 2017 is breaking those records again. If you line up all the hottest years and put them on a line, all the 15 hottest years have all been since 2000. It's really, it's accelerating over the horizon. Now, the Rio Earth Summit was in 1992. That was when the world came together and agreed that we should be on this path towards sustainability without really defining what that was. There's nothing sustainable about our current lifestyle and culture. In fact, we're way past the carrying point that we need to be at. So once the world passed 350 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's basically the world the energy is arriving from the sun and into our planetary system faster than it's leaving. And that's what global warming is. It's just like putting another duvet on the bed. The heat is trapped in and it leaves it more slowly. And we won't be anywhere near sustainable and we're at, 406 parts per million right now? And we won't be sustainable in any way until we've brought that back down to 350 or less. So just being green, slowing down, reducing our carbon footprint a little bit less isn't going to cut it. It's just not enough. We've got to actually, in permaculture we talk about regenerative development. We've got to fix the problems that we've caused. We have to put back the forests. We have to bring all that crap out of the oceans. We have to find different economic models that actually take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soils, which is where it came from. And once we start getting onto that path and we find strategies to do that, our whole life experience will be different because we suddenly find ourselves collaborating and working together and working to a common goal. There's a video I like to show quite a lot of my courses, and it's interviews with guys who've been out in space, the shuttle and Apollo astronauts and stuff like that. It's called the overview effect. And I say to them, what is it that you see when you get this overview perspective? You look back and you see planet Earth hanging there in space. One of the guys said, do you know, we went to space and what we discovered was we were already in space. We just had never had that perspective. We hadn't seen the Earth as a planet. And what they said, and when you look back and you look down at Earth, they said it looks so beautiful, so stunningly beautiful, so dynamic, but also so fragile. And the notion of countries, of different nation states, their behavior suddenly all just falls away when you see the planet as a whole. And what they said was, the person who put it most succinctly said, if we want to survive, if we want to sort of make this transition to sustainability, we have to start seeing ourselves as a single species with a common destiny. To forget all of this stuff about countries and nations and races and all this junk that we've sort of had in mind is we're one species, Homo sapiens, and we're on one planet and we have a common destiny. So either we fix this or it's kind of curtains. And that's again is really a leap in thinking to get to that stage. Look, all the indicators, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, absolutely off the scale. There's always been change, there's always been variance, but not of the scale of what we've done just in a few short decades. You know, I grew up in Telford in Shropshire, and just down the road from where they built the first ever blast furnace, 1750, a guy called Abraham Darby built the first ever continual industrial process. And at that time, the world global population was 1 billion. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 285 parts per million. There was no plastic in the ocean, and the equatorial forest belt was completely intact. That was 250 years ago. We've now got 7 billion population. We've completely removed the equatorial forest belt. And the carbon in the atmosphere is now over 400 parts per million. That's more than 30% more than what it was 150 years ago, 200 years ago. In geological time, that is a blink of an eye. It's like it's immediate. We've set the planet on fire. Not only that, is that we've liquidated, we've burnt 50% of all the stored carbon resources. We've burnt those in the last 60 years, since 1936. We've just literally set the world on fire, and we call it an economic model. We just did, and this is over. It's not gonna. There's no more growth left in the system. We've asset stripped our sort of the biosphere, and we've called that income. We've got to get out of this thinking, and we won't do it. We won't get out of this thinking if everybody's pulling in a different direction with their own little idea. You know, we need something bigger that unifies us. We're one species with one destiny. Remember that. Think about that. Think about what that means. And we don't need to be talking and planning about this now. We need to be turning these into actions, you know. Just agreeing with it, getting little huddles of people who agree with each other. It's a good start point, but we need to go out there and set things in motion. And I'm really trying to do this. I'm reaching out in lots and lots of different directions. And at Sector 39, Ollie mentioned my organisation, we've created, is we're all about taking permaculture to new places. We're not about staying in the comfort zone and just talking to people that, you know, that we kind of agree with. I mean, a lot of our work is about really pushing at the edges and trying to find new places to go to. The idea that there's 97% scientific consensus around climate change is just unpack that for a moment to understand what that means is we're more certain about this than we are that smoking causes cancer. We know more about climate change than we do about almost like any other scientific discipline. We know a lot more about climate change than we know about gravity. We don't really understand it properly. We understand this. That's certainty. You don't get any more certain than that. The only thing that we don't know is, if you put 3 duvets on the bed, just how quickly will you get hot? Or what happens if you stick a foot out? Well, make little changes. That's what they argue about. There's no disagreement about the fact that this is happening, and it's happening at a rate that is terrifying because it's happening so quickly. There's stuff being published now to say it's going to take 30 years of concerted effort to fix this, but the decisions and the actions that we take now set us on that course. It's absolutely critical. Every day really, really matters. Sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true. This is a bit wordy, but in the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, this is the top-level scientific survey. They published this in 2013. What they basically said, what that says is industrial agriculture doesn't work. It consumes 10 times more energy than it produces in food. For every 10 calories, for every calorie of food, they're burning 10 calories of diesel to get it to you. That is not sustainable. And it's losing topsoil. And it's pumping water out of the aquifers. It's just not sustainable. That's our food. That's Tesco's. That's what we've got used to, this cheap food supply. It's absolutely unsustainable. And it will be the first thing to fail. If you've got 60,000 hectares. I mean, there's again another video I show. In Idaho, where they grow a lot of potatoes from McDonald's, they got fields there that are 100 miles across where they're growing one species of potato. One species. You never get that in nature. Nature's diverse, complex. Many species living together in complex interactions. You never get a monoculture in nature. This is where most of our food comes from now. It's from these vast monocultures. And just imagine how vulnerable those are to just a little bit of climatic change. If one plant fails, they all fail. That's catastrophic systems failure. And permaculture realized that to be sustained, to be resilient to change, you've got to have diverse, complex things. Many different species, living together in a guild. So I do a lot of education work. We're actually working a lot in schools at the moment, and in schools they teach science. Science, chemistry, physics, biology. That's taking measurements and deductive reasoning to draw conclusions. What the scientists are saying is, we're in a crisis, absolute crisis. And so I say to schools, how can you be teaching science and then not listening to what they're saying? You're totally undermining your own education. If science is saying we're in a crisis, then surely you should be, doing something. This is the Paris Climate Agreement as a graph, okay? We're just launching this actually as an art competition as well, so maybe if anybody's feeling creative, I'll introduce you to that. But is what the Paris Climate Agreement, and this is getting science-based, 195 countries signed the Paris Agreement. The only 2 countries that didn't sign it, one of them was Nicaragua, because they just said it's just way not realistic, it's not strong enough, it's not ambitious enough, and we don't, we're feeling climate change already. It's not fast enough. The only other country that didn't sign it is Syria, and that's because they weren't there. It's telling. This is the most significant agreement ever signed. It's taken since 1992 to get everybody to really sit down and come on something that's science-based, and that's what it is. Now, this is what it says we have to do. It gives us a couple of years to make a plan, but what we have to do is we have to halve our CO2 emissions, halve them. So globally, we produce 40 gigatons, so 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide pumped into the atmosphere every year. In the next 10 years, we have to halve it. Globally, everybody. Every country, every individual, every business, every organization, every school, every hospital has to halve its emissions in 10 years. That's going to be really, really difficult, especially because we're not even talking about it. And then, that's what this red line, descending red line is. And then, between 2030 and 2040, the next 10 years, we have to do it again. We've got to reduce it from 20 to 10. Now, that's only half the amount, but it will be twice as difficult because you would have done all the easy stuff. And then if that wasn't hard enough, in the 3rd decade, we have to halve our emissions again. And that last 5 is going to be so difficult. So difficult. And so we've got 30 years of massive change in front of us. This is more significant than tooling up for World War II in terms of the resource, how we're allocating resources. But what's more is, that isn't even it. They've been arguing for years, we're going to have some technology, we'll develop some carbon capture and storage technology that can pull carbon out of the atmosphere and lock it all up. So they've had to factor that in. That's what the blue line is. That's carbon capture of storage. We've got 30 years to figure out how to do 5 gigatons of that a year. That technology doesn't exist yet, and yet we're relying on it. The 3rd line is the silver one, is farming. Is that farming at the moment, agriculture, emits 5 gigatons of CO2, and by 2050 it has to be 0, and by 2060 it has to be -5. So we've got to completely reform our agricultural sector and do all this other stuff. And this is what. And does this guarantee that we avoid runaway climate change? No, it gives us a 66% chance. That's what they're saying. That's what they've signed up for. That's why Nicaragua wouldn't sign it, because it's just said, well, this is suicide. Would you take what's Russian roulette? You get your 6-shooter and you put 2 bullets in it, spin it. Who's going to play? Who wants to play? Because that's what we signed up to. So this map, this graph isn't even, that's the agreement. We've got to do better than that. We've got to do significantly better than that. We're not going to do that just by turning the thermostat down and getting a Honda Prius. It's a whole new reality. And we've got to lead on this. And I work a lot in schools, I work a lot with young people, and I say to them, look, the climate has changed. You're growing up into a different world, a world of post-economic growth. What you will be doing, your lives will bear no relation to what's gone before you, because you've got to deal with this problem. We really, really do need to gear ourselves up to think about this in a real way. Okay, I also do like international development work, and since we had the Millennium Development Goals, and those have now evolved into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17, and no one's really saying, how are we going to do this? Okay, this is the target, but how are we going to do that? I mean, this is the conversation I want to have. Not that we have to do it. How are we going to do it? I actually think that once we get on that journey, it's going to be a ball. It's going to be great. I'm a professional optimist, by the way. My job is to tell you we can do this. It's going to be great. But we've got to get on with it. We've got to stop talking. We've got to start doing it. Okay. It's interesting. It's interesting just to look at what the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are, because this is about decades and decades of international development and investment. Number one, no poverty. Yeah, I'm all down with that. How the bloody hell are we going to do that? Next one, zero hunger. These aren't ambitious targets, are they? Like we're going to have. When you looked at 2 out of the 17, we've got no poverty, zero hunger. Although actually they could be the same thing. Permaculture starts by securing the food supply anyway. So anyway, I'm not going to get lost into this. There's a whole bunch of stuff there, and perhaps you know about it already. But it's peace, justice, and strong institutions, climate action, energy, whatever, equality. We have to challenge inequality. That's a hell of a list. So the question is, what's the mechanism? How are we going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? And even should we be thinking about those when we've got the whole Paris thing to be thinking about? And the truth is, we can achieve the targets for the Paris Climate Agreement by achieving these Sustainable Development Goals. They are actually one and the same thing. But no one's supplied us a mechanism of how we're going to do that. And that's why permaculture is so important, because permaculture does. This is how we do it. It's a simple thing, but it's a really powerful thing. So I've put the sort of the ethics in at the core of it. These are the 12 principles, and I'll probably come back to this a bit later on, because it's a little bit more detailed than just for an introduction talk. But it's like a clock. There are 12 of them, and it goes around in a cycle. It's never ending, right? And let's start at midnight. That's where we are right now. And the first principle 12, is creatively use and respond to change. This is an interesting thought, because what I'm here to say is, and what permaculture tells us is, there's only one thing in life that we're guaranteed: change. That's it. And in fact, we fight against it all the time, because it scares us and worries us. But in fact, the only certainty is change. World is constantly changing. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. But it's not the same, is it? Things have been rearranged slightly, things have moved on, and some things have decayed, some things have been born. There's a constant process of change, and what we need to do is to look at that and understand our place within that. And then the first principle is observe. We don't just run around like chickens with their heads cut off, responding, oh my God, the house, what are we going to do? You need a plan. And the only way you can come up with a plan is by observing, doing an audit. What have we got? What do we need? What is it we're trying to achieve? Not money, not abstract things. Let's really think about it in a real way. What's measurable and tangible? Whilst we're thinking about that, principle number 2 kicks in, which is catch and store energy. If you observe nature, that's what it does. Trees create as much surface area as they can to capture the sun's energy and turn it into sugars and starches and carbohydrates. In fact, once we step outside of the whole fossil fuel energy, which is really just fossilized sunlight, we understand that only plants can turn the sun's energy into a stored form of energy, sugars, carbohydrates. Only plants can do that. So whatever it is that we're going to do going forward is, we've got to build a really good relationship with plants, whether it's directly or indirectly, but it's the only thing that can actually catch and store energy and begin a process. We're going to need water, we're going to need fertile soils, we're going to need biodiversity. All these are forms of energy, information. These are forms of energy. You need to start accumulating them now. Make some compost. You never regret having made a compost heap. You're never going to wake up in the middle of the night and go, damn, why did I do that? I regret it so badly now. You know? You start doing it. Think about slowing down the flow of water through systems, how you can get it to sink into the ground more. Think about accumulating the social connections that you need. So that's another really important form of energy, is the fact that we need strong communities and strong societies. Why am I going to help you if I don't know you? If we haven't got, if our economies collapse and we've only got, we've just got trust left. It's interesting, there's a Russian writer called Dmitry Orlov. He experienced the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he said there's two things that got us through the collapse of our economy and the complete loss of value of our money. So one was, we knew each other. So we helped each other. And because the journeys are so big, people don't commute to work, they live next to where they work. So they have strong communities. And so the other thing that really served us well was, we never really trusted the communist system because it was never that reliable. So we actually produced 60% of our own food ourselves on allotments and dachas and shambas or whatever, small farms, and then you had to preserve food and things like that. That gave them a degree of resilience which we don't have. We need to think about that. And these are the things that we need to start really focusing on. So principle number 3 is obtain a yield. Once we started collecting these useful things, whether it's information, energy, resources, we need to then create yields from that, i.e. grow some food, build active community links, and so on and so forth. We'll come back to these principles because they're really, really interesting, but they lead you to action. They don't just like, make a poster and stick it on the wall and then go back home and watch YouTube. It's like, no, actually it leads you into action and strategy. I'll come back to this. I'll come back to these if we have time. So the first thing that we did, and some of the stuff for the project, and this is actually leads into a competition which we're just launching at the moment, is I looked at that Paris Climate Summit graph and I thought, blimey, that looks a bit grim, doesn't it? It looks like a whole lot of going without, cutting down on things, and it's back to the old hair shirt environmentalism and denying yourself or whatever. Plus also, kind of pictographically, to me, it looks like a ski jump. When you're accelerating downhill into what? Into the abyss. To be flung off into the void, that's terrifying. So I thought, let's just subvert that. Let's just have a bit of fun, but let's just subvert that and look at that differently. All I did was flip the graph and put the scale at the bottom. So the 40's now at the bottom and the 0's at the top. To me, what that represents is us rising out of the pits of despair, the dark abyss of addiction, fossil fuel addiction. We have to throw it off. And the pollution and the never-ending warfare that comes from it. Isn't it interesting that all of these proxy wars that we're fighting are all about access points to oil and gas? I wonder if that's a coincidence. Doubt it. We will never have peace until we have got off fossil fuels. We will never restore the ecological balance of our planet until we're off fossil fuels. So I see it as a rising up, almost coming back up to the surface where we can breathe the air again from the bottom of a muddy pond. That's a much more positive way of looking at it. Because once we get back up to the surface, we're not going to miss what we've left behind. We're not going to say, that was so great, wasn't it? Sitting in the traffic jams, eating burgers and living this miserable life sort of thing. We get a chance to reinvent. And I think that's the first thing, is that permaculture is positive. And it's like, from the moment you realise that you're on this journey. You can't put this genie back in the box again. Once you've realised just how unsustainable life is, because the only thing to do is to start moving away. Not for some charitable reason or just because, some do-gooding reasons, because it makes sense. Anyway, I'm not getting ahead of myself now, but okay, so we're finding lots of different ways to communicate this, giving these ideas to students, challenging students then to create teaching resources that speak to them, and that we can use then to speak to other people and take to other people. This is a little... this actually came off... again, I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, but the last couple of years we've been teaching this a lot in Uganda, and what staggers me about the Ugandans compared to us is... you give them these ideas and they act on them immediately. The guys who came in our course last year, they went home. One guy, Paul, said, I thought about it for a couple of weeks. Then I realized, I'm going to have to set my own model farm. So I started it after 14 days. He's inspired. He started running his own courses within 3 weeks of having done his course. 4 other people in his community have started their own permaculture demonstration farms and gardens, or in their district, and all 5 of them came back this year to do the course again, and they just the momentum that they're creating is phenomenal. Whereas I do a lot of teaching in the UK, and I tell people about this stuff, and they go, "Oh, that's really interesting, Steve. Wow, I'm going to go home and hang that on the hook marked interesting next to opera and cricket or whatever it is." It's like, no, this is about action. Permaculture is about turning these things into action and thinking about starting from yourself as well. Okay, so there's loads of definitions, but these are my colleagues in Kampala. They're called Broadfield Enterprises Uganda. All these guys are like 26, 27, and they went to Makerere University in Kampala, which is a business and enterprise. It's really interesting. University that leads in business and enterprise. They're not environmentalists. They're interested in creating sustainable businesses that meet needs in their community. And what they've realized is permaculture is the tool to do it. They're devising all sorts of sort of business-related enterprises, but that meet needs, contribute to society, and help fix the ecological problems. And it's really exciting to be working with in an environment there where people are so proactive. The other thing about Uganda, which really fascinates me and which totally contrasts with UK, is the average age, the median age of a Ugandan is 17 and a half. Half of the country right now is in school. And they haven't invested in infrastructure. They haven't invested in having wars with their neighbours and stuff. What they've done is they've invested in education. And there's just like these millions, their population's doubled in the last 20 years. And there's this enormous number of people who are just about to leave university. They're just as smart as we are. In fact, they're more focused. Their drive is incredible. They're in classes of 120 kids in a class, and you can hear a pin drop when a teacher speaks. They are paying attention. And they're all on the internet. They live in mud huts, but they've got solar panels on the roof, and they charge up their smartphone. You've got roaming internet everywhere all over the country. You've got better coverage than we have in Wales. Uganda grows 90% of its own food organically. I just suddenly got this vision as, wow, these guys are going to go straight to the 21st century. They're just going to skip the whole coal, industrial, building motorways, centralized sewage systems, all this crap that we've created here that we will not be able to sustain. We've built the wrong houses, we've built the wrong buildings. We've built all these suburban housing. How are we going to heat those houses without cheap energy? How are people going to commute 40 miles to work? There's as much energy in a gallon of petrol as what you can physically do in terms of work in a month. It's 4 weeks of work. Cranking a handle is equal to 1 gallon of petrol in terms of energy. There's people burning that much energy to go and be a hairdresser for the day. We're not going to be doing that in the future. We're just not. The one thing we know about the future is it's going to be local. Much, much more local. Our ancestors still could sail ships to Australia or whatever, but it took 3 months. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself again, but so it starts. It's so simple. The first realization is when you look at natural systems, there's energy flowing through them all the time. Every time it rains, that represents an energy, that water. Where does that water go? Downhill. Every time. It's so easy to predict. And so your first strategy is, well, you can't do anything without water. You can't grow anything, you can't nourish yourself, you can't clean yourself, you need water. So what's the best thing to do is, if you build things along contour, then that water gets trapped and it soaks into the soil and it stays there for months. As soon as the soil becomes dry and hard and compact, when it rains, the water just flows over the surface and leaves, and it's gone. And then you've got to pump it back up the hill again, using a pump that will break and cost money and powered by diesel. Unsustainable. These are such simple strategies. If you change the profile of the landscape so that your growing areas are slightly lower, then again, water's trapped in it and sinks into it. You take compost and physical organic waste, mix them together and compost them. Not only does that make the soil more fertile, but the soil can actually absorb and hold more water. 3 inches of mulch, of leaf litter on the surface of the ground can actually hold an inch of rain. It's a big sponge. You don't need ponds. You don't need irrigation systems. You don't need any of these things. That's just flawed thinking. We invented all these things when we had loads of cheap energy. And now we're going into a future that won't have that cheap energy. We need to solve these problems by using design. And that design means having a plan, a strategy that you stick to over a long period of time. And this is the power of permaculture, because it gives you those tools to be able to make long, complicated, joined up decisions. These simple techniques transform even parts of even the Saharan fringe and some of the really most arid and harsh places in the world. These techniques work there. They work everywhere because plants always like the same things. There's a whole bunch of stuff done in China just by reshaping the surface of the land, getting to when it rains, if it's very infrequent, that water is trapped in the system, so it sinks in. And then there's a process called succession. Nature abhors a vacuum, so bare soil. If you're given time, that bare soil plants will start growing there. And even if there's no nutrients there's nothing there for the plants to use, there are certain kinds of plants that can fix their own nitrogen, which is the key nutrient that plants need to grow. And they do this by building a relationship with soil bacteria. Everything in nature is a partnership. It's a guild. It's a team. So what you can do is go into very degraded landscapes like that. All you need to do is slow down the water a bit and add some nitrogen-fixing plants, and it starts to build soil. It might take time, but you get a system that's starting to regenerate. And as the conditions develop, more complex plants will move in, or you can add them as a designer or as a gardener, and slowly the landscape repairs itself. It's interesting to think about that. So there's enormous potentials to fix all of this stuff. This is the bit where I'm saying it is a good news story, but it doesn't happen if you don't apply yourself to it. And we've put ourselves in this role because we've taken all this free energy and we've done all this damage on the planet Earth. We've now put ourselves in a situation where we have to fix it. And we really do have to fix it. So, a whole bunch of stuff about evolution. I'll skip this, but what's important to know is that, nothing exists in isolation. All species are a product of guilds. Even the soil, the bit that earth, dirt, whatever, that covers the surface of the earth, turns out to be the most complex thing you could ever imagine. We don't really understand soil biology, not even with all the technology that we got, because it's so complex. There's at least 5 trophic levels of different species feeding off each other just before you even get to the surface of the soil. If you look at a field full of crops or a field full of cattle grazing in the grass or something, what you can know is there could be 10 times the biomass of what you see above the soil below it. And that's what's providing the fertility. We've reduced this amazing natural complexity down to NPK fertilizers derived from petrochemicals. And in our agricultural systems, we think that is somehow a replacement for all of this biology. Well, it ain't. And what's really interesting is, knowing all of this, we can go into really degraded environments and teaming up with these species, understanding how we're working as a team, we can bring back the fertility. We can easily do it as well. It just takes a bit of time and a bit of conscious application. I'm sorry about that door's a bit messes it up a little bit, but I'm a big fan of Robert Owen. Robert Owen was a Welshman who's born in Newtown in Powys. And he made his name in Scotland in a place called New Lanark Mill. In 1800, he became the manager of New Lanark Mill. And in 1800, New Lanark Mill was the biggest cotton mill in the world. And he went there as a manager. He wasn't a capitalist. He was just came from a humble background. But he married the boss's daughter, so he was pretty smart. So he ended up in charge. Robert Owen is significant because he invented cooperatives. He created the first fully mutual company, and he founded the cooperative movement. And the cooperative movement is about how people work together for common goals. And I've started to realize that this is one of the most important things, social tools that we have is cooperatives. I'm doing a talk on cooperatives tomorrow, and I'll talk a bit more about Robert Owen. But he said, this is I took this photo at New Lanark Mill, and there's his quotes and things everywhere on the walls and stuff. And he said, "In this new world, all will know that far more happiness can be obtained by union than by disunion." That's actually a permaculture principle, principle number 8, which is integrate rather than segregate. That's just another way of saying we need to work together. We really, really, really need to work together. We need to start thinking as a single species with a common destiny. Understand that. Union rather than disunion. I mean, there he's thinking about social movements and stuff and what's led to the trade union movement and cooperative movement. But really these ideas abstract much wider than that. We need to think about that because we've been brought up to be so selfish, so self-centered. So the whole purpose of life is about me, 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 me. And we're really missing something. And again, I think the talk of the speaker before from Ecuador, it was in his culture, is they don't think like that. They really don't. And in fact, it's the Ugandan guys I've been working with don't think like that either. There's a Kenyan guy actually who comes on one of the courses, came on one of the courses. He was 20. He's already started his own demonstration farm. And he said to me, "I'm really concerned about the example we set for the younger generation." He's 20. Do you know any 20-year-olds that think like that? The UK, I mean, hopefully there are, but, So this slide is about guilds. And this is the reason why agriculture doesn't work. Nature never does a monoculture. And if you start to think about, it's not just a random association of plants. Is okay, let's just say we're interested in the tree, it's apple tree, a pear tree, whatever it is, that's our crop, right? And if we're extracting energy from that all the time and stressing the tree and eating all the fruits, eventually it will become depleted. But what we've got there is, you'll notice, is it's surrounded by other plants, some of which have really deep roots. And those plants can access nutrients and moisture from sometimes 20 feet down in the ground and bring it up to the surface. Trees feed very close to the surface. Also, trees directly compete with grasses. So you either need to use herbicides and things to control the grasses, or you use plants. You use other kinds of plants. Plants that bring in beneficial insects. Plants that harbour the predator insects that eat the things that might otherwise become pests. Permaculture teaches us that once we start to understand nature as a system, there is no such thing as a weed and there's no such thing as a pest. We don't need herbicides, we don't need pesticides. We've just got it wrong. All that's telling you is it's out of balance. So you've got too many green fly, it means you haven't got enough hoverflies and ladybirds, which are what regulate the numbers of that. And that's because you're just trying to just thinking too simplistically. What we teach is in organic growing, really, what you learn is you're not worrying about the plant, you're worrying about the soil. If you've got healthy soil, you'll have healthy plants. And you have healthy soil by building a whole ecosystem and thinking about the relationships between all the elements in that system. And then you start to realize it's very hard to harvest these polyculture environments with a combine harvester or with a big tractor, because you've got lots of different things together and they come and ripen sequentially and it doesn't all come at the same time. So actually that puts people back in the fields. It puts us back on the land. Cuba, when the Soviet Union collapsed and suddenly they lost all their imports they obviously had the blockade from the US, it's 1990. They had the blockade from the US. They lost 70% of all their agricultural chemicals and everything overnight. And Cuba also is a country, they're one of the most urbanized countries in the world, actually. They're not farmers at all. And they starved for the first 3 or 4 years because they just didn't have any food. But by about year 6, they re-engineered their cities so they could grow 70% of their food from within 10 kilometers of the urban fringe, which means that you could carry the food into the cities on donkey carts and wheelbarrows, and they did it organically. And there was no organic certification. There was no the reality was it's cheaper that way. The food would sell out by 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning. The food would pretty much sold out, and the only stuff that was left for sale were the cans of baked beans. They were like $8 or something. No one could afford them. So we can do this. We really can, but it takes 3, 4, 5 years. Everybody lost 20, 30 pounds in weight during that time because these cheap sources of food weren't available to them. It's not even that you have to rush away and start making a compost heap, although that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. But we're completely emotionally and intellectually unprepared for what's coming. because we're not thinking about reality. Then reality is all this cheap energy and cheap food is just going to fall away really, really quickly. Our economy will fail because it's based on growth. You can't just have endless growth and there not be consequences, which means that money will lose its value. And what we'll be left with was it'll look exactly the same as it does, but just all these kind of invisible things that we took for granted won't be there anymore. And we'll be confronted with physical reality, growing food, carrying things, and just reality. Anyway. So then you can start designing, and you thought, oh, now I've got the principle about guilds, and now I've got this principle about catching and storing energy and using landscape to harvest water and harvest energy. I can now start to put systems in place that manage nature, help build soils, create habitat for wildlife and other species, and also create energy yields and food yields for humans. We can take an active partnership with nature and take an active role in that. We can, feeding 7 billion people organically, it's going to be easy. It's going to be really, really easy because we've got to actually, and it's the only way we'll ever be able to feed the people. I've got this thing, people sometimes say this, and it gets me, I've thought about it a bit because obviously I've been doing this for a long time, but people say, yeah, but, the thing that you environmentalists say, and I already said I'm not really an environmentalist, but anyway, the thing you environmentalists always overlook is the basic problem is there's too many people. That's what they say, isn't it? You've all heard it. Population's the problem. Well, it's interesting because 20% of the people of this planet produce 70% of the pollution. So it's not even a numbers game. So what it is, I actually say, oh, there's too many people. Usually too many people means, I don't know, usually means Africans and Asians or something. No, there's too many of us living in our way. If everybody on the planet wants to live like we do, no chance. The average Ugandan emits 1,000th of the CO2 than the average American. 1,000th. Do you think there's too many Ugandans? It's not affecting us, is it? It doesn't matter. An extra person born in Uganda is a challenge for the resources of Uganda. Extra person born in the UK is a challenge for the global resources because we pull our stuff in from everywhere. Think about that. What I'm trying to get people to think as well is, but that's assuming that people are bad, that we have a net negative impact on the planet. What if each new person, fully trained in permaculture and integrated into systems thinking and traditional knowledge, actually has a net positive impact on the planet? Then you'll turn out we haven't got enough people. We need more. We like to say in permaculture, the problem is the solution. A problem is just the inverse of its solution. Why would there be too many people? Oh, because people fuck the place up, right? Pardon my language. Well, let's stop that then. Let's flip that and turn that into a positive thing. Isn't it interesting that at the point when we are facing our greatest ever challenge, we've got the greatest ever population too. That's our resource. That's why this idea is so important, because if we can communicate this idea and get everybody to be active in regenerative development, to use a posh word, but of fixing things rather than being part of the problem, then, we haven't got enough people. So think about that. That's really empowering and exciting to think about, and to think about how we work together. It's very, very simple technologies. This is a ram pump. It's something which takes the energy out of the river to pump a very small amount of water back up to the top of the system again, and you can flow it back down in your integrated food growing system. That's design. That's planning. But it doesn't take a lot of resources. You can do that by hand. See, the other one of the key principles of permaculture is around using local and natural resources. And what we're actually teaching people is, you start with what you've got. Everything you need, you've got. Sure, it'd be great if someone from the outside came along and gave you 10 grand or something to make it a little bit easier. But actually, that would probably mess it up, because then you'd set up a system that relied on having those external inputs. Nature works with what it's got. We have what we need already to fix these problems. It's only a matter of deploying it and setting these things in motion. Principle 6 in permaculture is there's no such thing as waste. This image was made by students in our local high school in Llanfochlin in Wales, and I'm bringing this stuff into my ambition is to get permaculture into mainstream education. I want this to be core curriculum. Every school is actually designing its own sustainable future. The Paris Climate Agreement says we're all going to be carbon negative by 2050. So I'm saying to my school, okay, let's imagine that. What's it going to look like in 2050? And if that's what it's going to be like in 2050, what's it going to be like in 2040, 2030? Let's then imagine the stepping stones back. So what are the changes we need to make now that are going to get us there? And this is a conversation that we all need to start really urgently having. But it's much easier to project into the future and go, well, I don't quite know how I'm going to get there, but in a nice, sustainable, carbon negative world, wow, let's imagine that. Let's create some positive visions of where we want to go. I don't want to see any more dark, dystopian, twisted, nasty future scenarios with Matrix and all those sort of things. We've put all of our energies into imagining what it's like when it all goes wrong. Let's put some creative energy into imagining what it's going to look like when we fix these problems. And then start imagining how we're going to do that. Let's create the songs, the music, the plays, the art, the vocabulary, and you know, and the cultural ideas that we will need to convey us to this future. That's what we need to get busy on. And that's what I mean. We need to get active straight away. Is preparing ourselves emotionally and physically and socially for the changes that are coming, because they are coming, and we need to be connected to the food supply, and we need to be connected to each other. These kind of events are priceless because that's the beginnings of that. You're all proactive people. That's why you're here. You know, no one had to twist your arm or anything like that. You've gone out of your way to come all of this way to be exposed to these ideas. That puts you right at the leading edge of change. And the permaculture it's all about edges. We're fascinated with edges. And you're a social edge. You're an edge of change, of bringing these ideas into the mainstream. That's your duty as an adult, is to share what you know with the people around you. That's traditional society tells us that too. No such thing as waste. I found that picture the other day. People are improvising with what they've got just to make something that works. There's a canoe made out of, out of soda bottles. I've done a lot of stuff on the collapse of the. I've done a lot of research on the collapse of the fossil fuel industry. The other day the UK government announced that they're going to phase out the internal combustion engine by 2040. It was not going to last anything like that long. It's probably 2025 we'll probably see the end of the internal combustion engine, because once you're onto that path of certainty, it becomes a thing it's no longer worth investing in. The change will come much more quicker than we think. It's interesting to note that in whatever, depending on all sorts of variables, but across great swathes of the US, solar energy, electricity from solar is now half the price of coal. How is Mr. Trump going to restart the coal industry if it's twice as expensive? Who's investing in that? Seriously, even if you don't care about climate and care about people, it's a bad investment. And that economic reality is going to really drive change really fast. And I just think I'm not a campaigner. I don't care really that much what other people think. I mean, I do on one level, but I'm not here to try and persuade anybody of anything. I'm really, really not. But I just see it like this change is going to be so enormous and so significant that if you haven't prepared yourself, at the very least, intellectually and emotionally for it, you're just going to get left behind. You're just going to be like one of those big fat jellyfishes stranded on the beach at high tide mark when the tide's like gone out several miles. And that will be the people who haven't, and they'll be complaining, oh, well, someone should have told me. You were told, 1992. I kind of like that. George Carlin is a US stand-up comedian who passed away a couple of years ago. He said, let's be absolutely clear, America is an oil company with an army. And this is what we're experiencing, is the last chapter of the oil age. It's no coincidence that at this juncture, what we're seeing is the sort of the end play of that. This global power game, it started in about 1907, 1908, and it was a really critical decision that got made, actually, that changed the path of the world. And it was Winston Churchill was head of the Admiralty, the Navy, at that time, just before the First World War. And he made a decision. And obviously, Britain became great by sailing, by trade, and by looting and pillaging. And we did that by sail. And then briefly we had coal-powered ships, but coal-powered ships weren't much good because coal becomes mainly the cargo of the boat is the coal because it's not a very dense form of fuel. And so in 1907, Winston Churchill decided to commission the next generation of warships for the UK, and they would be powered by oil. And we didn't know about the North Sea then. Britain didn't have any oil. Foreign policy became all about access to the routes to the Middle East. Just think about it. Everything that has happened globally has been part of the big game, as they called it, with this geopolitical positioning to maintain access and export routes from the Middle East back to Western markets. And that has been foreign policy. That has been the thing behind just about every war that we've had in the last 100 years. And that's why actually the military-industrial complex and oil industry and agro-business, they're absolutely umbilically linked. They are manifestations of the same thing. And that's why the most powerful and radical thing that you can do is to disengage from that as much as you can. Start growing some of your own food, get an allotment, or buy some local farmer's market, or just sprout some lentils on your windowsill. Do something that somehow distances you from that and starts to put you in a slightly different thing. And there's never been a generation more empowered, more educated, and more free thinking than we are right now. We have more freedom than our ancestors had. We're not limited by, and we are to a degree, but we're really freed up of a class and race and religious dogma that previous generations have been really, we had a free education, free health care, you got a passport to take you anywhere, you got EasyJet, come on, there's nothing stopping us. And we've got the freedom to organise, freedom to publish anything we want. There's nothing stopping us being as effective as we want to be now. What are we waiting for? You don't need permission. We've got it anyway. We signed the Paris Agreement. That's it. We've got to get to our emissions to zero as fast as we can. We signed up for it. So just get on with it. Don't wait. What are we waiting for? Waiting for Jeremy Corbyn to get in and then we'll do it. Come on. It really is up to us. There's another image that the kids at the school have generated. It starts from yourself, and it starts from your own inner convictions, actually. The decisions that you start making in your head now. I want to be part of the solution. I want to be part of the response. How am I going to do that? I'm going to start observing and interacting. And I'm going to start catching and storing energy. And then as I move on, I'm going to think about how I can create yields, whether that's training and teaching other people or starting projects or businesses, or gardens or whatever. On it goes. This is where I live. I live in a little Welsh village called Llanrhaeadr y Mochnant, and I love it. And it's really nice. It's a human scale society. We have a house, and next door we have Dave. You're snoring through this bit. He's one of the investors in our club. So we're a cooperative. And just to say, we bought this property. It sat pretty much empty for 10 years. It's got a shop and a 3-bedroom house next door to it. It sat pretty much empty like a holiday house for 10 years. And it came on the market, and I thought, I see potential in this as being like a little community hub, so affordable place to live, and then we've got a shop, we can sell local produce, and there's a gallery above it, which is where Sector 39 office is based. And so we put it out there, and we said, we want to do this project. And I asked people in the village and locally whether they'd invest in it. I don't have any money. I don't have any capital at all. I bought a £1 share in Dragon's Co-op, that's it. That's all I've put in personally. I have to pay a rent and stuff. And we managed to raise £180,000 of other people's money to buy it. And we have to pay rent and all that sort of stuff, but it's affordable and it's manageable, and I'm my own landlord. Which means if there's anything wrong, I have to complain to myself. But that's a more empowering position to be in than just giving some money to some landlord who doesn't reinvest surplus back into the system again. And that's actually one of the key things in permaculture. So I started to think about how can we create affordable housing? How can we start to create our own enterprise and businesses that are actually allow us to operate within our own ethical framework? Because most of our jobs take us outside of the core ethics that we actually want to live under. And so things aren't going to change until we can find other routes. And the only way that we can achieve that is by working together. And it's just really handy that this Welsh bloke back in 1800 sat and thought about it, and he came up with the 7 principles of cooperation. And I'll be talking about that tomorrow. But it actually gives an operating system of how to do that. Again, it's about working together. It's about understanding we're in guilds. We don't exist alone. And if we can find ways to work together, we can. I've been involved in co-ops actually for 22 years. I started my first housing co-op in 1995, and it's now a frightening amount of time ago. And we started out like in the remotest parts of Snowdonia, and a little hill farm with nearest neighbour was 6 miles away, sort of thing. And although that was a really great experience, and I learned a lot from it, and it's still flourishing today, you're not very visible. This is the 4th co-op I've been involved in setting up, and it's right on the high street. And okay, it's only Llanrydder, it's not a big place, but lots of tourists and holidaymakers come through there and stuff. And we've got a shop, a permaculture shop, on the high street in town. And we hold events, and we write in the local newsletter, and we work in the local school and stuff. So we're now embedded in the community. I don't really believe in eco communities and eco villages. I think it's a little bit elitist. But I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just saying that I'm more I want to be at the heart of a real community, and to think about how I can help shape and bring that, bring that with me, if you like. So it's an honour and a privilege really to it's constantly challenging as well. It's not easy, but we're really, really trying to operate within the ethics as much as we can and as effective as we can. And this is the other thing. Perhaps I just need to get to is nature is self-replicating. Mate, just now who was talking to us from the rainforest is who planted the rainforest? It's a natural system, isn't it? It self-replicates. So the idea is that once you've got enough elements and ingredients in place, as a designer, you can just step back and it has a life of its own. Well, I told you about how proactive these Ugandan guys are. Well, I've taught 2 PDCs out there. It's a 2-week intensive permaculture course that sort of gives you these tools and ideas. And 3 of the guys, there's the guy there in the green t-shirt, his name's Godfrey Opolot, this guy here. He did the course in May this year. We finished on the 3rd of June, actually, so that is exactly 2 months and 2 weeks ago. And these photos are already a week old. It took them 2 months. But they've gone to their local high school. It's called Niero, and that's a view of the high school. Like lots of buildings, just sort of dead flat land around it, and just a set of buildings or something. But they've worked with the school, and they came up with a design to completely change the school environment. And they went in there with I can't read it, but anyway, 35 teachers and 60 kids and a whole bunch of other people, and they've planted a food forest around the school. And they've also worked to engineer the system, so all the rainwater that runs off all those buildings, because when it rains there, it really rains. You go for months and months and months without any rain, and then you get inches in an hour or 2. So you can imagine the damage that water can cause. But not if you catch and store it and soak it into the ground. So I taught these guys 2 months ago. They've already completely re-engineered their local school, and I had no input into it at all. And that's what gets me to think about, if we unleash these processes, you'd have no idea where they're going to go. But he emailed me actually only 2 or 3 days ago, and some of the people in the town of Niero in eastern Uganda, they've seen what they've done at the school, and they said, well, why don't we do that in the trading estate as well? And they said, well, we'd have to get the mayor and whatever it is, council on board. So they had a meeting last week, and it's just been decreed that everyone's going to have to plant 3 trees in front of their commercial units, and starting to bring permaculture directly into the planning of this town in eastern Uganda. Then he did the course 2 months ago, and he's re-engineering his whole society. It's like, wow. Honestly, it's setting something in motion that has a life of its own. That's what's so tremendously exciting. Okay, I'm going to just this picture. There's something really, really important happening in there, and this is at the heart of one of the things that we've been getting really excited about. In East Africa, most people live off grid. About 70% of people still living in kind of mud huts and villages and what have you, which means that they don't have electricity. In the last 20 years, the population of Uganda has doubled. And in that time, the forest has halved because everybody cooks on wood. And I haven't got the photos in this slideshow, but some of the schools we went to work with, they had like 26 tons of wood delivered in one go, and that's just what they're going to cook their lunches for. And it's like that's square mile of rainforest. I mean, like it's just terrifying to see. And if you a country with a small population and a big forest, you can always go and get a few twigs and sticks to cook on. But there comes a day when, as the population grows and the forest shrinks, you can't do it anymore. So they're hitting, I don't know about peak oil and all that stuff, they're hitting peak wood. They are physically running out of resources, and it's forcing them to change the way they think. And they literally cook their food on, they have 3 stones with a big pot, and they put the sticks underneath. Now, I don't know how much you know about wood pyrolysis and wood combustion, but when you burn wood in the air, on the ground, it burns at a temperature of 400 degrees centigrade. You get 20% of the available energy as heat, and 80% of the potential energy goes off as smoke and soot and char and creosote and particulates, which are really damaging to your lungs. The biggest avoidable cause of ill health and death in vast swathes of the developing world is inhalation of wood smoke. Wood smoke is a really, really, really poisonous thing. There's so many green people who move to Wales, and the first thing they do is get an old wood stove and start burning wet wood in it. It's nothing green about that at all. It really, really isn't. I won't get too distracted on that. Anyway, what they're doing there is they learnt this on the course. All we did was show them gave them the plans and showed them how to do it. But he's gone home and he's made his own. It's a wood pyrolysis retort stove, and what that does is instead of burning the wood at 400, it gasifies the wood. So it heats the wood up, so it yields volatile gases. That when you mix those with air, they burn at 600 degrees centigrade. And you can reclaim 90% of the available energy. There's no smoke, there's no ash, there's no pollution. And what you're left with inside the stove when it's finished cooking is pure charcoal, which is more valuable than the wood that you started off with. And what we've discovered is you can crush that charcoal, mix it with animal manure, and put it into your land, and the ground becomes more fertile permanently because it creates habitat and structure for those soil microbes that I mentioned earlier. So if you could literally have millions or tens of millions of people who used to cook on wood now cooking on gas, and instead of burning that wood and putting out carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, they retain it as biochar, and then they put that into the soil, then you're reversing climate change, and you've got an energy efficiency, and you're addressing one of the most serious health problems. This is like a win-win-win scenario. And think of all that work and time wasted collecting wood, which you're only getting 20% of the energy from. It's like, this is permaculture. This links everything together. So there's an even more remarkable thing, right, is, I don't know how much you know about like cows, how cows digest their food, but cows, like most mammals, we can't digest cellulose. It's not possible. We can't, that's why we don't eat grass. And cows can't digest it either. But what they do is they ferment it in their stomachs. They have 4 partitions in their stomach. They ferment the grasses with using anaerobic bacteria, which live in their gut. That bacteria is the same bacteria that lives in soil and makes soil healthy too. And what we've discovered is that, and also, and it produces a lot of methane, so cows belch out methane when that's a byproduct of this fermentation. What we discovered is if you crush up this really high temperature made quality charcoal, which we call biochar, if you crush that up and feed that to the cows with their food, then they get a 20% energy efficient gain because they process and ferments the food better. They produce a lot less methane as well. And when it comes out the back end of the cow, that char is now inoculated with all the soil microbes that you need, so it goes straight into the fields and increases fertility. So you start to think, well, okay, we can do short rotation coppice, we can create really good biological habitat, we can use these systems to trap water and infiltrate water, we can put them along roadways and pathways, we can then harvest these continually, because things grow so fast there. Um, Trees in Uganda grow 20 feet in 2 years from start. Mzizi tree. I've seen an avocado tree that was about 2.5 years old, 20 feet, 25 feet high with avocados on it. So if you're growing food at that speed, 'cause it's right on the equator, then you can thin those branches out off those trees, and you can pyrolyze them. You can create biochar. You can use that for your cooking. You can process that food. Actually, it's the same with chickens and fish farming as well. You can incorporate it into feed, and then the actual animal manure is then inoculated the biochar with soil microbes. Um, and you get increased fertility, which means you can grow more trees, and you get a situation that grows and builds on itself. These are the ideas that will resolve this climate crisis. But it's got to be put into the hands of everybody. And it's got to then become, this is how we behave. This is just normal. It shouldn't be special. You don't have to call it green. It's just sensible. So huge potential. I mean, this is my friend Ali Tebandiki. He lives in a kind of a shanty town on the edge of Kampala. He's done the course. He took me to go and see where his gran lives. And that mound behind him, it's just crap. It's just, they don't have waste collection. There's no refuse collection. There's no toilets. They just throw organic matter on the ground. It breaks down. It all comes a bit smelly and a bit unhygienic. Now he knows how to do composting. He's realizing he can take that pile of rubbish behind him and turn it into fertile soil. He can completely transform what the slum looks like and have avocados and guavas and papayas dripping everywhere and green beans and what have you. Once you get these ideas going, you realize what you need, the resources that you need are there already. You just need to strategically arrange them in a way that they work better. This is China. The air pollution in China is so bad from all the coal that they're burning, is that they're now actually starting to create whole new possibilities. These are the first sort of bioclimatic skyscrapers that create clean air around them because they're integrated with plants. As I say, we have to really think about our relationship to plants, because plants clean the air, rehydrate the atmosphere, and build soil and sequestrate carbon. We have to really think about that. So this is a whole city that they're building. These are new possibilities. Just why? There's no reason to build a single concrete building ever again. We just got to leave all of that behind, just walk away from it, and just start thinking about new realities, new possibilities. How can we combine? We're only just beginning to get going with this stuff as well. Imagine how, if everyone in this room starts applying these ideas and innovating, imagine the cross-fertilization that might come from those different ideas. When we start to realize there's no patenting, there's no copywriting, we're all working together. We're not trying to own things. Yes, we all need to make a living, and we need to understand that, meet our own needs, but not at the expense of other people. These ideas should become common ownership of everyone. There's no copyright, there's no patenting in permaculture. All the teaching resources I create, and I create loads of them, they're all online. You can download them. They're all there for free. We're not doing this for any other reason than to solve problems. Yeah. Do you know what? I don't know. It's very famous. It is a trial thing. It's very, very new, but it exists. Yes. No, I used to have some photos. They were just photoshopped, and then it was of the concept, but they've actually started building it. Yes, it's the idea you're using biological systems to create. Yeah, 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 yeah. There's a few countries now. They did it in Pakistan last week. They planted 1 billion trees. They got just mobilised a huge amount of population, and so they realised that from deforestation it's causing flooding and climate change, and we can send these things in the other direction. Okay, I've got to just mention this because this is inspiring as well. It's a friend of ours in Mid Wales. His name's Azzy, and he's an artist really, but he's a maker. He knows how to build things, and he heard about the TV show Grand Designs, right? You've heard of it, right? He heard of it, and he understood it that it was about building your dream house, right? But he actually doesn't have a TV, and he's never seen it, and so he misunderstood one little detail, is he thought you had to build your dream house for £1,000. So he set himself a £1,000 budget, and he built this house. And it cost £1,000. He grew, it's round wood, structure that he grew from coppice. It's a straw bales construction. They mowed their field and for hay and swapped that for the straw bales. The outside, the render is clay and lime. The windows were recycled and reclaimed. Roof materials were reclaimed. The only bit of cement he used was in the foundation and the footings, and the building is insulated. It's a place where they used to have a lot of parties and gigs and stuff. And the floor is insulated by it's just made out of empty wine bottles bedded in sand, and then he just put a screed on top of that. And actually, you get inside, and he found it really hard. He didn't know how to do the plastering. It's insulated with sheep's wool. We have a lot of waste, low-grade wool waste in Wales, so again, that was free. He spent most of the money doing the electricity and the plumbing. So it's really posh inside. It's really nice. He came to do the rendering, the plastering on the wall, and he found that difficult. You don't use gypsum plaster because it's not permeable. So then you trap moisture in the thing. So you want to come up with something that was permeable and cheap, and he actually did it with papier-mâché. It's just, and you've got to see it. You've got to see it. It's absolutely stunning inside. And when he came to do the electrics, which he did, obviously that before he did the thing, but he just got a big needle and put the wire on it, and you just pass it through the bales. It was just like that easy. It's really nice. You go in and go, it's super insulated. It's higher than any basic building code, the thermal value, insulation value of the house, just by the fact that it's made out of straw bales. Why is there a housing crisis again? Tell me. Why are we spending £200,000-300,000 for some horrible red brick box that isn't properly insulated and in some place that we don't really want to live, and we've got to drive 20 miles to work? It's only and actually they got this past planning retrospectively as an art installation. But anyway, that's another story. But what I'm saying is it's possible. It's possible. You can do it. All of these barriers that we think are there aren't there. And in fact, we signed the Paris Agreement. We have to innovate. That is our job, is to go out there and push at the edges and create new realities, create new possibilities, just like Azzy did with his house. I worked for a long time at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth, and it's a place where they, try and live within these design principles and parameters and ethics. And this is a passive solar building. It only needs extra heat for a couple of months in the winter. The roof's designed to allow the maximum amount of sunlight in, and that big wall there is just made out of compressed earth, subsoil. It's about 20% clay, and it's just compressed. It's just been compressed actually by vibrating it, and then it dries out and it sets really hard. And that the interior of the building then is like a big storage heater. So the sun shines in through the windows onto that big, thick, massive wall, and it slowly heats up over during the day or during the spring and summer, and then it slowly cools down as the year goes. The internal average temperature stays pretty much the same. It's design. It's not materials. We always think we have to throw materials at problems and high technology. We don't. They're really simple things that we're trying to solve. We just need somewhere warm and dry to live and some decent food to eat and a bit of human connection. We can do all of that from what we've got lying around, just by having a bit of design, a bit of imagination, a bit of just daring to think out the box. This is another project that I was involved with, and it's called Cumharry in Newtown, actually the same place as where Robert Owen comes from. It's just your standard industrial unit there. But what we did was we looked into the waste stream of Newtown, and we just thought, I wonder what's in these black bags that we're paying all this money to carry around. And this is going back a few years, but they're full of food waste. And I thought, well, that's resource, isn't it? In fact, if you put food waste in your bin bags, and your bin smells and rats and mice want to get in it, if you take the food waste out and you compost it, we now in Paris, we only have our rubbish picked up once every 3 weeks. Because we don't need it picking up, because we separate out the food waste and we do something else with it. So the rubbish doesn't smell. And instead, we make lots and lots of compost with it. And I was employed by the organisation to start using some of the compost from within the building, and also we took the rainwater runoff from the roof, and I turned what was a car park into a community garden. And it was a beautiful, organic, biodiverse, highly productive environment on a trading estate. And in fact, people were so impressed with the garden that we got 3 years of funding off the National Lottery to then set up a horticulture training enterprise and to set up a series of other gardens elsewhere. Good ideas are infectious. And if you're actually addressing real problems and creating new possibilities, then people come out and help you as well. There's a lot of momentum happening around these things, and I just like to show, just because there's so many possibilities, and we live in an amazing time of opportunity. It might not feel like it, but we really do, because we've got to reinvent everything. And if we can reinvent things, and we can reinvent things within our own ethics and value systems, then actually it all becomes really exciting. And that's what we have to do. So my latest project is called One School, One Planet, and we're taking permaculture into schools. And what we're doing, we're trying to link schools together. So we're working with our high school in Mid Wales, and we're creating an online kind of learning centre as well. And we're going to we're writing 12 units, one education unit, each based around each one of the 12 permaculture principles. And we're going to start running this course on the 7th of September. But we're also going to have other schools doing the same sessions remotely. So some of our African partner schools can be doing the same work, and then the pupils can be communicating with each other. What are you doing about climate change? How are you responding to it in your community? And how are you doing it in yours? Let's get a conversation going. Let's create artwork. Let's create stories. Let's create momentum around these things. This is the only future these kids are going to have anyway, so we need to bring that into the into the arena as quickly as we can. And the change that needs to make is going to have to come from this rising generation, because they're growing into this new reality. So the most important thing we can do is give them the tools and the skills to be able to do it. And that's what this is all about. So that's the next sort of Sector 39 project. And I just put this in at the end, really. It's a bit of a plug, commercial. We teach this stuff everywhere. I do these permaculture courses. I do them in different formats. One format being a 2-week residential intensive thing, and that's designed to change you, to rewire your brain, and just project you out to the world a slightly different, more energized person. And they're good. They're intense, but they're really good. But they're not always accessible to people. So I do sometimes spread over weekends. And I started, it's bizarre, but not bizarre, but it was just maybe an unlikely partnership. But I was approached by the Chester Cathedral last year, the Anglican church. And they said, we've got all these big buildings and no one goes in them anymore. We've lost our religion. We don't know what to do. Because we know that we have a responsibility as religious people for the environment, but we don't really know how to do that. Could you help us with that? So we just... last winter, we taught our first permaculture course inside Chester Cathedral. We did it in a 11th century vaulted stone room that was actually part of the cathedral. That's pretty amazing, really. And we got to talk to and meet the senior management team of the cathedral, which is totally outside of my normal sort of cultural circle. So, what's interesting is that they've invited us to come back again this winter. So we're kicking off in October. Hopefully, if that all goes to plan. I think maybe that's last year's advert, but it's pretty much the same. It's sort of spread over 3 or 4 months, actually, with gaps, because obviously the church gets busy at Christmas and stuff. But it's interesting. And what's really interesting is being in a 1,000-year-old building, because that's what Chester Cathedral is, and start to look at that differently and realise they used to have a community of 38 people living there, and they could feed them all. They had fruit trees, they had carp ponds, they had beehives, and it struck me that actually the church used to be a carrier of culture. They used to carry knowledge, seeds, how to graft trees, how to keep bees, how to brew beer, and very simple sort of things. But they were a kind of a cultural repository, and you could go. Their job wasn't to feed the town, but their job was to be there to support and educate them. And actually, I thought, well, that's not so different from what we set up in Newtown with our community garden project. There is. We need these little nodes where people can come and learn and gain those skills. And wouldn't it be great if we could team up with some existing infrastructure who have some resources to get them to reimagine their role in society? because they also are deeply alarmed and scared by climate change, but they don't really know how to respond to it because in fact, they're huge consumers of resources. They've got this massive 1,000-year-old stone building, and they try and heat it with heating oil. I mean, it's a bit insane, really. Anyway, the potentials and partnerships are just abound, are out there, and it's up for all of us to find those connections. I never expected this to happen. I never expected to work with a waste management company in Newtown either, but or a bunch of students in Uganda. To be honest, it's been an amazing journey. I say I got involved in this in 1991. I did my first course at a training centre called Fambizanai in Harare in Zimbabwe in 1991, which is now whatever that is. That's a long time ago. It's been really interesting, and I think it's just getting interesting. And I really implore you to find out more, get involved, find how you can translate these ideas into your world. I'm not telling you what to do, I'm not telling you what to think, but try and work from your own observations, your own experiences, and think about that. You need to be more involved with the food supply. You need to be more socially connected. You need to be thinking about educational ideas and inclusive ideas for the next generation to facilitate this change that we need to need physically. We really do need to make it happen, and to realize that once we set it in motion, it's going to accelerate. It's going to just run away with it, and it's going to be really, really exciting.